welcome back to this episode of Doodling Through Education. Today is a history episode, and we're going to be talking about World War I leaders and how their decisions affected the outcome of World War I. So the leaders we are going to be talking about today are Clemens of France, Lloyd George of England, Nicholas II of Russia, Wilhelm II of Germany, and Woodrow Wilson of the United States. So let's go ahead and jump right in. World War I began on July 28, 1914, and ended November 11, 1918. First, it's important to note the two different sides in World War I to know where each of these leaders fell in their beliefs. The two sides of the war were the Allies, which included Serbia, Russia, France, Italy, Britain, and eventually the United States, and the Central Powers, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. The First World War left an estimated 16 million soldiers and civilians dead, and countless others wounded. Advances in weaponry and military technology provoked many changes as each side tried to gain an advantage over the other. The introduction of aircraft into war left soldiers and civilians vulnerable to attacks from above for the very first time. So, the first leader we will talk about is Georges Clemens. He was born September 28, 1841, and died November 24, 1929. The young Clemenceau was first elected to Parliament in 1876, 5 years after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. From that time on, he considered the newly united Germany to be a menace, and he had always felt that another war was inevitable. Clemenceau served as Prime Minister from 1906 to 1909, and throughout that time was still very anti-German. He always seemed to be arguing for greater military preparedness and for tighter alliances with Britain and Russia. Then, on November 15, 1917, 76-year-old Clemenceau was named Prime Minister of France for the second time. Although Clemenceau did not get along with the President of France, President Raymond Poincaré, at this time, Poincaré realized that he shared his same belief and passion for defeating Germany at all costs. He vowed no surrender, telling the Chamber of Deputies that France's only duty now was to, quote, cleave to the soldier, to live, to suffer, and to fight with him. Over the next year, Clemenceau would hold his country together through the darkest days of the war, and finally into the light. In November of 1918, he heard the Germans had agreed to an armistice. The old Tiger, as was his nickname, is said to have broken down at that point in tears. He then went on to insist that the Versailles Treaty required German disarmament, and overall he remained dissatisfied with the treaty in its final form, believing it didn't treat Germany harshly enough. The next World War I leader that we are going to talk about is Lloyd George of England. He was born January 7th, 1863, and died March 26, 1945. With the outbreak of the First World War, Lloyd George served in the Prime Minister Asquith's coalition war cabinet as Minister for Munitions and as Secretary for War. Unhappy with Asquith's conduct of the war, he rallied with the Conservatives to oust Asquith, succeeding him as Prime Minister on December 7, 1916. This episode caused a split in the party from which it never entirely recovered. Along with Asquith, several other prominent liberals resigned from the government. One of Lloyd George's greatest achievements during the war was in combating the growing German submarine menace, which in early 1917 threatened to starve Britain into submission. He achieved this by forcing the adoption of the convoy system, which was a group of ships sailing together for protection, and it was designed to help protect cargo in passenger ships. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Lloyd George fell moderately in the middle of the harsh demands of Clemens and the idealistic proposals of Woodrow Wilson, who we'll talk about later. And to a large extent, he helped to shape the final agreement, although he also later concluded that the treaty was a failure. And he also predicted a war again within 20 years. Next to talk about is Nicholas II of Russia. He was born on May 18, 1868, and died July 17, 1918. When war was declared by Germany with France in August of 1914, Russia came into the war on France's side. At this time, there was industrial unrest in Russia that continued into the first half of 1914. Up to half of the entire workforce are estimated to have gone on strike that year. The war, though, temporarily brought an effective end to industrial unrest. However, it did later return. The war also brought Nicholas political benefits. The establishment united behind him in the conduct of the war. Dissatisfied with the army's conduct of the war, Nicholas then took personal command in September 1915. The Russian army were fighting on the Eastern Front, but had an ongoing lack of success, which was causing some dissension at home. Unfortunately, now operating under Nicholas II's supreme command, its continued failure reflected directly upon Nicholas himself rather than the army command. Nicholas's popularity dwindled, and he was persuaded to abdicate on March 15, 1917, under the recommendation of the Russian Army High Command. In search of exile, Lloyd George offered a haven in Britain, but later withdrew that offer under the direction of King George V, who did not wish to be associated with him. So he moved to the Siberian city of Ekaterinburg by the Bolsheviks. Unfortunately, Nicholas and his family were executed on the night between the 16th and 17th of July, 1918. The next World War leader was Wilhelm II of Germany. He was born January 27, 1859, and died June 4, 1941. Wilhelm was an intelligent man, but proved to be emotionally unstable and a poor leader. After 2 years as Kaiser, he dismissed the current chancellor and famous German leader Otto von Bismarck and replaced him with his own man. He blundered many times in his diplomacy with foreign nations. By the early 1900s, Germany was surrounded by potential enemies. France to the west and Russia to the east had formed an alliance. He also alienated the British in an erratic interview with the Daily Telegraph, which was a British newspaper, in which he said that the Germans didn't like the British. By 1914, Wilhelm II had decided that war in Europe was inevitable. He and his advisors determined that the sooner the war began, the better chance Germany had to win. Germany was allies with Austria-Hungary, and when Archduke Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated, Wilhelm advised Austria to give an ultimatum to Serbia that Serbia was sure to refuse. He promised Austria that he would then support them, meaning he would back them up in war. Wilhelm was sure that the war would be quickly over. He had no idea as to the chain of events that would take place. So, when Serbia refused Austria's demands, Austria then declared war on Serbia. Soon, Serbia's ally Russia was mobilizing for war as well. To help defend Austria, Germany declared war on Russia. Then France, who was Russia's ally, declared war on Germany. Soon all of Europe had chosen sides and World War I had begun. As the war went on for years, Wilhelm's control over the army waned. Eventually, the German army generals had all the real power, and Wilhelm became a figurehead. In 1918, it became apparent that Germany was going to lose the war. The army was exhausted and running out of supplies. There were food and fuel shortages throughout Germany, and on December 9th, 1918, Wilhelm abdicated his throne and fled Germany to the Netherlands. Last to talk about when talking about World War I leaders was Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Wilson originally hoped not to spend too much presidential time on foreign affairs. Then, Europe plunged into war in 1914, and Wilson, who like many Americans believed in neutrality, saw America's role as that of peace broker. The sinking of the passenger liner Lusitania by a German U-boat helped to shatter that hope. Wilson demanded an apology from Germany and stayed his neutral course as long as possible. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, however, was seen as unacceptable to America. At the start of 1917, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, which was a secret German communication to Mexico promising United States territory to Mexico in return for supporting the German cause. On April 2nd, 1917, Wilson finally asked Congress for a formal declaration of war. Wilson brought forth his 14 points, which was a program for a world without imperialism, which means when a country wants to take over another country or to take land from another country and expand their territory. Woodrow Wilson wanted a program for a world without this, or secret treaties, and a world where democracy would flourish and where the voices of weak nations would be heard as loudly as those of the strong. In Wilson's imagined future, the League of Nations, which was a global covenant among nations, would peaceably settle future conflicts. To President Wilson, the tens of thousands of American troops who crossed the Atlantic to fight alongside the Allies were the battering ram for his 14 points. When Germany offered to end the war on the basis of Wilson's world-changing plan, his representative, Colonel Edward's House, made the president's position clear to the Allies. They could accept these terms, or America would consider a separate peace with Germany. War-weary, the European Allies gave in. And then celebrations erupted around the world as the bloodiest war in the history of mankind came to an end on November 11th, 1918. And that is all for today. Those are the World War I leaders that mainly made the decisions that helped to shape World War I. So this week, go ahead and try and learn more about World War I or one of these leaders, and try and figure out some of the decisions that they made and why they made those decisions. And on that note, be kind, follow God's will, and take care. Bye.